have come to bring peace to earth. I haven't come to bring peace, but a sword. I've come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. People's enemies are members of their own household. Those who love their father or mother more than me aren't worthy of me. Those who love son or daughter more than me aren't worthy of me. Those who don't pick up their crosses and follow me aren't worthy of me. Those who find their lives will lose them. Those who lose their lives because of me will find them. Jesus has very little chill in this passage. Is that just me? Hey, check this one out. Therefore, everyone who acknowledges me before people, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But everyone who denies me before people, I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Kind of scary stuff. How about this? Disciples aren't greater than their teacher, and slaves aren't greater than their master. If they've called the head of the house Beelzebul, it's certain they will call the members of his household by even worse names. This is kind of a bummer passage. And I'll tell you, if you think that, you're not alone. When I was younger, I was actually legitimately scared by certain sayings in this particular passage. I mean, after all, that ominous warning, everyone who acknowledges me before people, I'll acknowledge before my Father, but everyone who denies me before people, I'll also deny, that is scary stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not like a lot of people walk over to you and say, hey, are you a Christian? And you're like, what, me? No, doesn't happen the whole time. It's not like people come up to you and say, hey, tell me about Jesus. And you're like, Jesus? Don't know the fella. Sorry, can't help you. Probably doesn't happen. But is that really all it means to deny Jesus? I don't think so. I think any time that we are untrue to our core convictions as Christians, any time we don't follow his teachings and commands, I think our behavior denies the reality and truth we proclaim when we say Jesus is Lord and God's kingdom is at hand. When we say that God doesn't want anyone to go hungry, but we allow others to go hungry, I worry. And it's not just for us generically. I'm not just sitting here, browbeating to do it. I worry for myself. There was a time before I was a preacher, I worked in the auto repair industry. And I remember I had just gotten off of a 12-hour shift. I had not had a lunch break. I had been working nonstop, and I was ravenous. I remember driving home and driving past my house and going to Pizza Hut to pick up the stuffed crust supreme pizza that I'd ordered beforehand. I remember pulling in the parking lot. I remember picking it up. I remember heading back to my car. And as I did, I remember encountering a gentleman who looked as though it had been a long time since he'd seen a meal. He was dirty, he was dressed in rags, and he looked at me and he said, boy, that pizza sure does smell good. I'm awfully hungry. And I remember looking at him and saying, yeah, me too, then getting in my car and driving away. And I remember getting home, and I remember the look that Sage gave me when I related this encounter to her. Because honestly, if I really believe that it is our responsibility as the church to feed the hungry, if I believe that God wants this world to be a place where no one goes to bed needing a meal, I had the opportunity to be true to my convictions right there and then. But in that moment, my hunger mattered more to me than following Christ's core teachings. Therefore, everyone who acknowledges me before people, I will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But everyone who denies me before people, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven. How many times a day do we find ourselves denying Christ by our actions? The late Father Brennan Manning once said, the greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, go out the door and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. In that moment, I had the opportunity to bear witness to Christ. I could have trusted that the God who cares for the sparrows would make sure that a large pizza minus one piece, minus whatever I was giving to my wife, would still be enough to feed me. And you can tell looking at me, I have not missed many a meal. Even back then, I probably could have afforded to have gone without if it meant making sure that someone else had enough. And so, my friends, I worry. I worry when, as a pastor, I proclaim week after week the message of Christ, and I have people who greet me week after week telling me what a great message that was and how much they enjoy looking forward to. They don't enjoy looking forward to, I'm sorry, I misspoke, but how much they enjoyed the message and are looking forward to coming back again next week. And you may think that's a weird thing to worry you as a pastor, but it doesn't worry me. It worries me because my calling to preach the gospel is a calling to comfort the afflicted and yet afflict the comfortable. The words of Christ are sometimes very prickly. They have this uncanny ability to unnerve, to make us uncomfortable in our own life and walk. They're kind of like picking up a pebble in your shoe. It may not bother you at first. You may not even notice it's there. But over time, in the course of this journey of life, if you don't do something to address the discomfort, you'll find yourself unable to continue on the walk. I think one of the greatest pieces of praise I was ever paid by a parishioner was when they left after a Sunday morning message addressing systemic racism, and they looked at me and said to me, "Pastor, I want you to know, I didn't like your message. I don't know why I didn't like it, but I didn't like it." This individual parishioner and I had an opportunity to talk later, and it was because in that message something was stirred in them that made them uncomfortable with the way they were living in the world. So often Jesus' words have the power to do that. And I fear that when we're praised by others for our good Christian example, the only thing we can know for sure is that somehow we're missing the mark because people didn't praise Jesus when he was here on this earth. When you see folks held up in the media as examples of good Christian living, I'm concerned. When you see politicians posing with Bibles and smiling for photo ops because they hope it'll gain them a couple popularity points, I'm concerned. I'm concerned that the message that's being preached isn't really the message of Christ. I'm concerned that these photo ops and images are ultimately detrimental to us as Christians as we seek to bring what Jesus was about to a world desperately in need of what Jesus was about. And when Jesus said he came not to bring peace but a sword, this doesn't mean that the Prince of Peace is ultimately a source of conflict in the world. It means that if we're true to our calling as Christ's disciples, it will put us at odds with anyone who is opposed to the work of God's kingdom, the work of reconciliation and wholeness, the work of life in this world. And don't kid yourself, there are people who are opposed to it, who butter their bread with oppression, who find a way to eke every last cent out of every last person they encounter. And if we don't find ourselves at odds with those who serve mammon rather than Christ, we're doing something wrong. Our calling as Christians is unequivocal. If we are to do the work of the church, the work of Christ in this world, we need to first and foremost be about our Christ and our God. We need to ensure that we are bringing his word to a world that is desperately in need of a word on high. We need to make sure that what we're doing not so much to garner favor from people, but to be true to our own nature and to our calling and to our Christ.